companies spend millions and millions of dollars on talent teams and headhunters and recruiters and job boards. But it's like when it comes to hiring agency partners, which arguably have a much larger impact, there's really not a lot of support there.
Marketing is about values.
Nike didn't call me and sell me this in a catalog. I bought this swoosh because it's ingrained in my soul.
When you have a product that really resonates with customers, the word of mouth grows like wildfire.
Welcome to the MarketingMax show. Now, let's dive in.
Welcome to another episode of the MarketingMax show. I'm really happy to have a Twitter friend, someone that I've met on Twitter, and that's become a good friend of mine, Dan from Vendry.io, on the podcast today.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for having me, Max.
Thanks for taking some time. So yeah, Dan and I were on a call about 2 weeks ago, and we were kind of commiserating about all the different mistakes brands make when deciding which agency to go with and which agency to hire, and kind of the downfalls of hiring a bad agency or just an agency that's maybe not bad in nature, but not a great fit for your brand. And halfway through the call, I was like, we should stop talking right now and schedule some time to record this, because Dan runs Vendry.io, which is a matching service that matches brands with agencies. I ran a Facebook and Google Ads agency for 5 years, as many of you know, sold it to a private equity fund. And now I run this website called agencyreviews.io. So him and I have both spent countless hours on the phone with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of brands and agencies in the last year. And we kind of see it from both sides. So I said, Dan, why don't we schedule some time and we'll record basically the conversation we had 2 weeks ago. So if we could pick up right where we left off before. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, if you want to give a little bit of background on who you are, what Vendry is, and then we can dive into kind of the list of common mistakes we always see brands make when hiring an agency.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think what's really cool about this conversation is Agency Reviews and Vendry really share a mission, which is trying to help people find better agencies. And ultimately, there's really no foolproof way for doing that. I wish there was a guaranteed solution for finding the best agency. We've even toyed around with like a money back guarantee. And the reality is no one can guarantee you the perfect agency fit. But I love the fact that resources are starting to pop up, like Agency Reviews and Vendry, where you don't have to go about finding an agency on your own. There are now third parties to help you do that. So how we tackle that, I know Agency Reviews is more of a review platform and in a directory for finding agencies. We tackle it more so with the recruiter model. So in the same way that a recruiter can help you find employees and executives for your team, we run end-to-end agency searches on behalf of some of the world's best brands. So a team comes to us, they're looking for an agency partner. We shortlist, 2 to 3 great agencies from over 10 plus proposals that we gather on their behalf. And then we connect them with those agencies after vetting them ourselves. Totally free service. We don't charge clients for running that search. We make all of our money through our agency partners, taking a percentage of the business we send to them. So for you as a client, like I said, it's a free resource for finding a great agency, similar to Agency Reviews. And so, hopefully we can help people lead to better outcomes.
Totally amazing on a bunch of fronts. Why don't we just dive in? I think we each have a list of a few things that we always see brands make mistakes of, or I don't know if my English is making sense today. I'm a little under the weather, but common mistakes that we see when brands choose an agency. You want to go first? Do you want me to?
Yeah, I can do the first one.
Go for it.
So one of the things that we do when we're asking clients about their agency search and really helping them craft their brief, because truly every great agency search starts with a really well-defined brief, is what's the decision criteria they're going to be using for making a decision? Because without clear definition around, here are the things that we're going to be evaluating agencies based on and making that decision. Ultimately, if you don't have that, it creates a lot of bias and subjectivity in the process. And so when you're hiring an agency, similar to when you're hiring employees, you really want to create objective standards for how you're going to be defining success. So whether that's performance and looking at their past results, whether it's agency size, that could be a criteria for you because you like working with an agency of a certain size, whether one of your criteria is related to industry experience. So how many brands have they worked with in my vertical or category? Having those decision criteria clearly stated up front that is going to help make your process a lot fairer, both for the agency and internally for you in terms of getting alignment within your team.
I absolutely love that. I don't know how many brands on planet Earth have ever actually taken the time to write out a brief that includes the most important things that they are looking for in an agency. When I was running my agency, Hell's Creative, for context, we worked with more than 120 or 130 clients, give or take, in the 5 years that I ran it. And I took more than 500 sales calls. So I've been on my fair share of calls with brands trying to convince them to work with us. But one of the things that I always asked, always, was what is most important to you when deciding an agency? And that was more for me as the agency salesperson to then say, oh, if you're looking for case studies, now I'm just going to send you all of our case studies every day until you agree to work with us. If it's team, I'm going to introduce you to someone on the team. But I think like, and I don't know any of Dan's list, by the way. We basically said we'd cover 5 in this podcast, and I didn't tell him mine and he didn't tell me his. But I think like taking that brief a step further, it's like, what do you look for most? And then drill down one layer and say, how can you get clarity on that? It might not just be case studies, right? Of course, you want to see that they have industry expertise in your particular industry, so they know the language and they know the target audience, they know all that fun stuff. But like, what are other ways that you might be able to prove that they have that industry expertise and they've helped companies similar to you guys do that? Or, you know, if team is really important, making sure they have the best people, what's, again, one layer deeper, what's one way to prove that? Well, ask to speak to the person that you're going to be working with, like the person that's going to be managing your account, not just the salesperson. I want to get on the phone with them and I want to ask them questions and I want them to ask me questions and I want to make sure that, you know, that rapport is there. So, yeah, that's just an idea that popped into my head about like how to take it a step further. But yeah, it's super important. Almost all of the clients that I'd get on the phone with out of those 500 calls, when I would ask them, you know, what are they looking for most? A lot of them said, I don't know.
That's a huge part of the process too. Yeah. And like the extreme version of this, and most brands are not going to go to this length. And if they are willing to, I think this is what like truly leads to a very successful search, is like a matrix or scorecard. And I'm sure you've seen some amazing ones or built them in previous roles. It's like, okay, clearly defining what you're evaluating based on and having a scorecard for that. That's like the framework for a really, really good search. And we have something internally that we use at Vendry when we're vetting agencies on brands' behalf. But you as a brand can do that, right? Like just open a Google sheet, say, okay, here are the different variables that we're going to be evaluating an agency on. And then to your point, Max, it's like, okay, within those variables, so say performance is like your top variable, which I think it should be for every brand. You know, like I think performance needs to be at the heart of every agency search, regardless of what type of agency you're finding. There's always a way to measure or define performance. But within that variable, it's like, okay, like say you're on a scorecard of 1 to 5. Well, you know, 1 is zero evidence and 5 is an extreme volume of evidence based on case studies and recommendations from other people and you know, maybe it's press articles or reference calls. So when you are building out that framework for how you're going to be running your search, to your point, it's like, okay, it's one thing to call out what those decision criteria are, but I think you took that a step further and said, well, within those decision criteria, you also have to be very, very clear on what that score is based on.
That makes all the sense in the world. I have actually never used a scorecard in any one of my businesses or any one of my projects ever. My friend on a Zoom call yesterday was walking me through his scorecard for like his entire sales and marketing team. And it blew my mind. Like I of course have trackers and I grade things on like A, B, or C sometimes, but I've never put it in like a formal tracker. I know EOS, right? Entrepreneurs Operation System or Operating System. Like they're obsessed with that, but I've never used it myself. You guys said you have one internally that you use for your agencies?
Yeah, so we use it for when we're running our searches because, you know, in general, when we're running an agency search on behalf of a client, we're getting anywhere from like 10 to 15 different proposals. And so we need to be able to distill the decision criteria that we've defined with the client and then be able to apply that to the proposals we get. Because one, like, you know, that's how we're able to objectively make that decision on their behalf and make clear recommendations. But to our agency partners too, we also want to be able to like really clearly define why or why not they're getting that business. And so having that framework is like a shared language that we can use with them. But like truly, if this feels like it's novel, it's not. Like a lot of what we use in our business, we're taking from a lot of what people do when it comes to hiring employees. And I think like what you and I have tapped into with agency reviews and Vendry is like, there are so many resources out there for hiring employees. Like companies spend millions and millions of dollars on talent teams and headhunters and recruiters and job boards. But it's like when it comes to hiring agency partners, which arguably have a much larger impact than like hiring, a couple of employees, there's really not a lot of support there. So it makes sense if those frameworks don't exist in the agency realm, but really we're just taking something that's already being leveraged when it comes to talent and culture, and we're applying it to external partners in the agency world. So that's really what we're trying to do in that regard. And so for teams that are kind of lost and where to start, I would say like look up employee scorecards when it comes to talent and hiring, or use a third-party service. If it feels like homework, it might feel like homework. Like hiring really good agencies is very hard. That's why we started our businesses, right? It's like, let's alleviate that effort. It's also why we made them free, like let's make it as easy as possible for people to access better agencies without having to do a lot of the legwork. Because it is legwork to find a great one. There's no sort of, side coding that.
Yeah, I love the analogy. I've never heard of it or thought of it. Like companies spend millions and millions and millions of dollars on talent and finding the right talent, making sure the right talent is placed in. And then people will spend 3 months trying to find the perfect agency with no data and with not nearly the amount of research and thought behind plugging an agency into their business as they would plugging even like a SDR, like a lower level sales member of the sales team. Like that's crazy to think about. It's almost giving me ideas for other businesses. Like how else can we help with data and with other things?
Here's a wild analogy for you. So I used to work at a startup that was like super culture driven, and we had these brand pillars or cultural pillars that we had all defined and adhered to, and it was a really great way for the team to all sort of align on what we were about as an organization. So when we'd hire employees, a cultural panel of existing employees would actually interview that person in what we call like a cultural interview. And so I probably sat in on like 50 of those, trying to assess if this candidate is a culture fit for joining the organization. Imagine we did that for agencies. Like the thought of doing a culture interview for an agency is like wild. I don't know of any company that does that, but shouldn't the same standards apply? Like if you've spent so much time defining a culture of your team and what it looks like to operate internally, I think the same standard should be applied to your agent. We're totally getting off the rails here. We've kind of gotten
no. This is valuable. This is good insight, and a perfect example of that is. I work with a few brands one-on-one as a fractional CMO, and literally just before we sat down to record this podcast, I was on with one of them and we were reviewing the leads that I generated for them using the Facebook and Google Ads funnel that I've set up for them. And for the first time in a long time, we had their sales guy. Normally it's just me and the CEO, but we had their sales guy on, and the guy's like, "Man, these leads, they're just not great." And I said, "Well, how many times are you following up with them?" He's like, "Well, I call them the moment they come in, and then if they don't pick up, like that's it." And I said, "Dude, I've been running this funnel for you for 4 months, and like it's already profitable. But you're saying like in the last 2 months, or last 2 weeks, sorry, in the last 2 weeks since our last call every 2 weeks, you're saying these people they're not good quality. Like how many times are you following up?" And he's like, "Yeah, I don't really do follow-ups." And then I looked, we were on Zoom, but I looked at the CEO, and he was like, "Dude, I thought we're following up with them every single day." And he's like, "Nah, like that, I'm not that kind of guy," is what the sales guy said.
Oh my God.
Just culture not fit. I don't know, like not a good culture fit.
It's important at all stages of your business, whether it's internal or on the agency side. I really hope this guy's not a listener of your podcast, but I'm totally aligned with you there. I think
that's fair. Well, you know who you are if you are. That was mind blowing. And so thinking about that, and from an agency perspective, like how aggressive do you want to be with A/B testing your Facebook ads, right? Like, are you guys more proactive or reactive? Like asking all of these different culture fit questions can be super important. But also the other thing about agency life is it's kind of like dating, right? Like you don't know how great or awful it's going to be to spend the rest of your life with that person until you move in, right? Like you really don't know. And I think if that's okay with you, it's a good segue into the second thing that brands get wrong. My first thing, which is you should not ever ask for or spend any time on references.
Hmm.
I think references are a complete waste of time and completely BS. You're smirking because you might disagree, and I know a lot of people would disagree, but having run an agency, I'll tell you, I would never in a million years put a potential client on the phone with someone that I knew would say anything remotely bad about my agency. Like, put yourself in the shoes of either the CEO, if they're the salesperson of the agent for the agency, or the salesperson, right? It's in their best interest to close you. Of course, they're going to be genuine, and you might get on the phone with someone and they might say, my only thing is you should really work with Sarah instead of Lucy or whatever. You'll get those insights, but you will never, ever, ever get on the phone with someone who's going to give you like the straightforward answer of don't work with these guys or they really messed this up. Because as an agency owner, right, if you put yourself in the agency owner's shoes or the salesperson at the agency's shoes, it's in their best interest to give you only the best case studies,
Right.
and put you on the phone with only the best people. So big mistake that brands number 2 make is they only read case studies. They only read reviews on the agency's website, and then they only speak to people who the agency introduces to them. So my trick, the way to solve number 2, brand mistake, or mistake that brands make when hiring agencies, number 2, is to go onto their website, look at their logo bar. Every agency has a list of logos that they've worked with. Find the founder or find the person that works in marketing or whatever the discipline is that's related to the service that they offer on LinkedIn, and message them. Hey, I heard you worked with this agency. Can you give me an honest feedback? Because oftentimes the agency will leave the logo up even if that client has churned, and even if that client churned and left working with the agency, and they're not happy, they'll still leave the logo up because maybe it's a nice brand, maybe it's a perfect brand in the niche that they're trying to go after to get new clients. So that's what I think is number 2. And I saw your smirk. Do you agree or you disagree with the no referrals phone calls?
I'm on the fence about it. I think references in general are flimsy, again, both on the agency side and employer side, because like you were saying, it's hard to get a bad reference check. No one wants to say something bad when they're being, asked to say something good on their behalf. So I certainly agree in that regard. I think one tip I would give, because I do think they are valuable, is, and to circumvent your tip about going through LinkedIn, you can just ask the agency to speak to a certain brand, right? They might say no, but if you see a logo or a certain case study or client that you think is a really good proxy for yours, whether they operate in a similar category or similar size or things like that, why not say, hey, can I speak to brand X, Y, or Z? And if it was a contentious exit, it'll be very obvious when they say like, hey, we can't do that. We're not working with them anymore. And that could be a red flag. So that's another potential way to do that.
I like that.
I'm curious from your standpoint though, like I totally get the, hey, agencies are only putting their best foot forward with reference checks and with case studies. So how do you deal with that through agency reviews? Because I imagine it's similar where with third-party platforms, obviously anyone can go and review an agency. But in a lot of cases, agencies are claiming profiles and they're sending them out to like past customers with positive experiences. Is there a way you guys are dealing with that? Or do you think it's like, as a neutral third party, there is a more objective way to assess reviews versus a reference check?
Yeah, so we can't necessarily control which clients an agency asks of theirs to write them a review, but we do 2 things. Number 1, we verify that every client that writes a review is actually a client of the agency. So it's not like their brothers or sisters writing a review, which I know is how Etsy and Airbnb and a lot of those platforms, like the supply side of those platforms, get off the ground, is they just have their friends buy something or say that they're staying at the Airbnb and everything. So we verify that by collecting the work email of the person that's writing the review. So not just like dan@gmail.com, but dan@vendry.io. And then we ask them to upload a contract or an invoice of the relationship or between you and the agency, right? The client and the agency. And the email has to match the email or the name of the contract or the invoice. And it has to be a paid invoice. It can't be an unpaid invoice because sometimes agencies will just send unpaid invoices or send invoices. And then people are like, you know what? I don't want to do this anymore. So yeah, paid invoice or contract, signed contract, we make them upload. Yeah, that's how we're able to verify that every review is an actual client. And then we also run, well, there's a beat. Never had that in the Marketing Max podcast. Marketing Max show. Yes, that's the first way. And then the second way is that we, run Facebook ads and ads in my own newsletter to brands, asking them to write reviews. And so it's not just the agencies that are inviting their clients, and likely, if I was in an agency's shoes, right, only really inviting the clients I know are super happy with me to write a review. But we're actually going out to the marketplace and say, hey, if you've ever worked with an agency, find them on our platform and write an honest review of them.
Nice. Yeah, I think that's awesome. I love that you guys go a step further and are verifying that data. I can only imagine the amount of data you have from all these signed contracts, retainer size and things of that nature. But yeah, that's amazing. And I think your note on case studies is also a really good one. Like, I think there's a great place for case studies in the agency search process. And I think that really comes down to filtering agencies, not necessarily vetting agencies, but filtering which agencies to include in your search, because you need proxies, right? Like, you need to figure out which agencies align most with your business. Because I think there's like 15,000 digital marketing agencies in North America, something crazy like that. So to whittle it down, I think case studies are really helpful for that, right? It's like, okay, I want a brand in this category that has done TikTok ads, and has spent 7 figures. So you do need to be able to whittle that down. Otherwise, you're going to be speaking to an infinite amount of agencies. But to your point, I think there's a layer deeper in vetting that you can't necessarily get from case studies or reference checks because they're far too favorable towards the agency. You need to find other ways to be able to verify that data.
Yeah. And I think it just goes back to the dating analogy. Like, you could read every review of the agency on agencyreviews.io, right? You could ask them for references. You could look at all their case studies. At the end of the day, you have no idea what it's like to work with them until you sign on to work with them. And what's even more frustrating is, at the end of the day, the agency is only as good as the person who's working on your account. So all of the reviews could have come from their first paid media hire that's running the Facebook ad account, who's amazing. And then you just happen to join, 3 months into their second hire, and that person is not as good at Facebook ads. And, it's going to be a different experience. So I think that might be a little bit where, like, hiring for an agency is very different than hiring for a person, because when you're interviewing the person, you are talking to the person that's going to be doing the work.
Consistency.
And that's why I mentioned before, like, if it's really important for you to make sure the team is amazing, you need to ask the person who you're on the sales call with to potentially work with that agency to speak to the person that's going to be running your account. And you need it literally. Like, I've had clients in the past of my agency when I was running it, like, want it in the contract that I'm only going to work with this paid media buyer, or I'm only going to have this creative strategist, because in their due diligence of us, they learned that, like, all of the ads on our, like, creative examples page on our website that they loved, not even in their industry, but the ones that they loved came from the same graphic designer on our team. And they wanted it in the contract that that person is going to be the main creative person on the team, or sorry, working on their account. So there's so many layers to this. But yeah, that's number 2, is I think asking for references is a sham and a waste of everyone's time. To Dan's point, I think there is an exception, which is if you find a logo on the site or a case study and you ask for a reference. There are some brands that just don't want to speak to people about it. But yeah, if they give some sort of sketchy answer as to why they can't do it, or it opens up a Pandora's box of like, they're not really a client of ours anymore. It's like, well, why not? Right? You can get more insight. Beyond that, I think it's a complete waste of time. So that's number 2. You wanna walk on to number 3?
Yeah, and I'll jump in here because I think we were kind of flirting with this topic a little bit. Ooh. But I will say there's probably not enough emphasis on intangibles or soft skills in the agency vetting process. So you were kind of talking about this in terms of you don't really know until you work with them. And that's true, but I think you can also assess for a lot of those soft skills during the evaluation process. So like some of the things that we really try and take into account when we're running agency searches is what kind of things does the client value from a cultural standpoint? Like what can we assess about the client that we think will potentially translate to the agency? So are they very hardcore and very intense? Maybe we need a very professional hardcore agency. Or are they really relaxed and a little bit more passive, and so maybe they communicate in a different style? We need an agency that reflects that. And so putting more emphasis on culture, communication, accountability, things like that, where those are really, really hard to measure. And so that takes a big effort to understand the emotional intelligence of the agency you're working with. But to your point, if you include the right stakeholders on the agency side, it can become really clear. I think like from just having a few conversations with the important individuals in that agency, it should be very obvious to you if these are the kind of people you want to work with. Because if they're not, that's a very easy criteria just to reject an agency. There are so many people in the world, so many people that work for agencies. If you don't get along with one, like that's a very, very easy reason to say, hey, like let's not work together. This is not the right fit, even if you think they would do an amazing job from a performance standpoint, because a lot of client agency relationships have fallen apart for way less than like two people not getting along.
That's so true. Are there any examples you have of soft skills that brands should be looking for, or red flags if it's like you get on the phone and someone's rushing or they don't have their camera on? I'm just trying to think of examples. Like what is an example that comes to mind for you of either a green flag or a red flag of like, yeah, this is someone I want to work with, this is someone I don't, in terms of the soft skills thing?
Yeah, so transparency is a really big one. So how open are they about, the work that they've done, how their team operates, just in general about like how their agency is run. Working with a partner that is transparent, knowing that they're going to be integrated into your business is really important. And this could be an entire point on its own, but like if clients feel like there's not enough transparency in the process, like asking for NDAs from an agency is a totally normal thing to do if you want to go a level deeper and sort of open up both sides of the conversation to share things that might not be available at the surface. So I think transparency is a really, really big one. Yeah, like you said, accountability and like timeliness. If an agency is not willing to like accommodate time zones or not prioritizing, meeting times when it works for you and your team, sometimes things come up. So obviously give the benefit of the doubt in those cases. But I've seen clients that have said, hey, like this agency is not making any effort to adjust for the time zone difference or to work with my schedule. This is like, if they're selling to us and we haven't even signed yet, this is a really, really bad starting point. And I've decided not to work with them because of that.
That's amazing. I would have never thought to think about like time zones or prioritizing some of those smaller things that might be really important to you. Maybe if it's like a language barrier or just any one of those points I think is spot on. I promise to those who are listening and watching, we didn't share these with each other, but I do think that number 3, the soft skills, looking for soft skills thing, is a good segue into number 4, my next one, if that's all right with you to jump to the fourth one, which is simply put, communication. This is like the crux of agency life. I fundamentally believe that at the end of the day, agencies are not fired because of performance. Most agencies are fired because of a lack of communication, like 9 times out of 10. Of course, if it's not working, it's not working, but you're going to end up staying with an agency longer, and that agency is going to end up retaining clients longer if the communication is not only crystal clear, but proactive. So the recommendation here is to ask what their reporting cadence is like. And you want to ask for a weekly summary or bi-weekly summary of everything they did for you that week. This is the easiest way to, I think, number 1, accomplish what Dan just said for number 3, which is like look for soft skills, right? Look for someone that prioritizes communication and is not trying to hide things from you. But it's also the easiest way to sift out or weed out agencies that kind of just want to put you on autopilot and not really talk to you very much or very often. So what we did at my agency without anyone asking is every single month we created a handwritten report for every single client. The first week of every month was like hell week for my team every single month, but we created a handwritten report in Google Slides every single month that said exactly what we did for you that month. So my account managers would go through their email inbox and look at all of the emails that were sent related to that client. And sometimes it was, we coordinated with a photographer about a new shoot they were doing to arm us with better Facebook ad creative. Sometimes it was, we updated their CRM a little bit, like whatever it was, we would just remind them in a list of like, hey, here's what we did for you every week, or sorry, every month. Now I think it's fair to ask for it every week, depending on the budget that you're spending or the retainer that you have with them. But being very crystal clear about what you're doing for that client every single week is great for the agency, because it helps you retain those clients longer, because you're justifying the work that you're doing every week or every month if you want to do monthly. And if you're the brand, it helps you get clear purview into what's going on, so that you can not necessarily micromanage, but you can ask questions, make tweaks, make recommendations like, hey, didn't realize you guys were doing this, or oh, I'm really grateful you guys are doing this. Communication is everything. And so I can't tell you how many times I've gotten on the phone with brands trying to sell them agency services, and they don't ask like, do we have weekly meetings? Do we have bi-weekly meetings? Do we have monthly meetings? What's your reporting cadence? And I would always say, we have a 24/7 automated dashboard that we give you access to show performance across the board for all your campaigns, and we customize that to you. But what you're really going to love is the handwritten reports. And now my development team for agency reviews actually every Friday sends me a recap of every single thing every single person on the team did that week for agency reviews. And it's just like communication is everything. And so figuring out cadence of how often you're going to communicate about what you're doing and why you're doing it, I think is extremely important. It'll help you weed out the bad agencies that are trying to just put you on autopilot and not really talk to you. But it'll also create for a better relationship, just like in a marriage or in a relationship with your mother or or with anything. The more communication, the better.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think your example of like how your team sends those recaps every week is awesome. Not every agency can do that, quite frankly. I think like realistically, every agency is going to have different processes for how they communicate. I think what you were touching on is like, okay, that's an extreme example of what you guys do really well. What's most important is just general rules of engagement between you and the agency, right? Like, what have you two agreed upon is going to be the communication structure for managing your account? So if you're comfortable with less communication, maybe performance is really, really good. And so you're like, hey, don't spend time communicating with me about my account. I trust what you guys are doing. I'm a very hands-on, brand owner. I'll be an account anyway. I can see what's happening there. I don't need that. That's totally fine. But make sure there's alignment on that before signing your contract, because that's how you avoid disappointment once the engagement begins. So it's going to look very different for every organization. You want an agency that fits into what your communication style is as well, right? Maybe you're not someone that enjoys meeting that often, but you want to have more real-time communication. Well, then set up a Slack channel with your agency. And so you guys have a channel for real-time communication. So it's really just about expectations, and then the agency being able to commit to those expectations and deliver on them.
Yeah, it's a good point, because sometimes like I have 4 agencies on retainer now across all my various projects. And sometimes I say like, we don't even need to meet. Just Slack me if you need anything. And so long as performance is good. I will say though, I have a stronger affinity towards the agencies that without me asking them to, they just send me what they're up to. In fact, one of my agencies, which is a lead gen agency, sends me a Loom video every Tuesday walking through the dashboard of the outbound campaigns. And again, like some people might not want that. And to your point, if you're the client or if you're a brand and that's not important to you, right? You just want the performance to be good and you're done. I think it just creates more of an affinity between the two of you guys, and it's just going to create a better relationship overall. So yeah, it's not a requirement by any means, but I think it's definitely something that is helpful to have. And I would encourage those brands that don't want meetings and don't want to be in the know, so long as everything's working, to just ask for like a 2-minute Loom video or a 5-minute or like a 5 bullet point, like here's everything that we covered this week, because it will lead to more optimizations, more tweaks, and you guys getting closer to your performance goals. Because again, over communicating will introduce more of those things, more of those opportunities, more of those tweaks.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah.
On the agency side, I think that's like a great example of like have a set of rules for how you're going to communicate with each other, but then like surprise your clients pleasantly, like go above and beyond. We've given you a few little tidbits here of like how you can over deliver, especially from a communication standpoint. I think your example of a Loom video is perfect. I shared like, connect with the client on Slack so they have access to you. There's a lot of ways you can go above and beyond just, by implementing a few small things that probably are not a huge lift for your team.
Yeah. I would encourage every agency to do that. I guess this episode is for agencies as well as brands.
100%. Yeah.
Do you want to take us home, Dan, with the fifth?
Yeah. Let me take so this is something you and I have gone back and forth on a lot. And it's really related to defining the scope of your project. So if you think about the extreme version of scope is like an RFP or an RFP process. So like we at Vendry are really, really hesitant to use the word RFP because like it makes clients absolutely shiver in fear because I think people have just been burned by RFPs both on the agency and client side. But I think what RFPs get right is they're these massive documents or artifacts describing what the client is looking for. And a lot of investment is made there on the client side to articulate that in great detail in terms of what they're looking for. And so if you take that and you apply it to like a small brand that probably doesn't have the resources to build an RFP, even just like a one pager that goes over what exactly you need in an agency, that is really the starting point for every great agency conversation. And if part of that, scope and part of that brief is I'm not sure what I need, that's also really important because there's agencies that also excel on helping you identify, product channel fit and exploring different channels. So if you're looking for a more experimentational agency, it's okay to say, hey, I'm not exactly clear on what it is I'm looking for. But building a really strong brief is the foundation for that. And that is step one with us. Like if a client is coming to Vendry, having us run their agency search, they spend a half an hour with our team up front with someone that's, been in a marketing role before that can have a back and forth dialogue and also push back and say, hey, maybe that's not a realistic brief. Can we restructure this a bit? Or, hey, is that exactly what you're looking for? Maybe you can articulate that a little differently. We need that brief because otherwise when we go and get agencies to submit proposals, like agencies want to know exactly what they're bidding on, right? Like they want to know what kind of client it is because agencies will also self-select out if it's not a good fit. And you want agencies to self-select out because if every agency is saying yes, it means your project's not defined well enough.
Yeah, I was thinking about this earlier today because I had a call with someone and I was talking exactly about this. Like, I almost think there needs to be an agency, and I guess this is in some way, shape, or form you guys, but like there needs to be, I guess, then more Vendries. Like there needs to be an agency that helps brands figure out exactly what they need. And the call that I had with someone this morning was basically they said they want lead gen and they wanted to run Facebook ads, but their particular industry, like Facebook ads is just way too small. Like you're just not going to be able to target anyone. And like I said, can you give me an example of a competitor, that's targeting the same people you are that's running Facebook ads? And they said they couldn't find any. And then I asked for the names of their competitors and I went and looked on Facebook ad library for all of their competitors' ads, and none of them are running because sometimes that just won't work. And so to your point, Dan, if they spent, a month interviewing Facebook ad agencies and they said, I'm looking to target this particular small niche, it's just going to be a waste of their time. And hopefully in a perfect world, to your point, these agencies are going to self-select out. They're going to say, hey, look, that's just too small of an audience. What you really should be focused on is cold email or cold Twitter DMs or something along that line. So I'm a huge fan of that. And we should probably find other ways to help agencies. Maybe we'll do a whole other podcast episode about like how to better identify exactly what you need. But RFPs, I don't hate them either. Like I think there's a lot, they get a lot more right than they do wrong. It just, it sucks when you're an agency and you do 20 RFPs and none of them close. That just sucks.
Yeah. But to your point, like I think this is something we do very well, which is we've decided not to be an algorithmic SaaS platform where you just get matched instantly. And I think you guys do a
Like
great
me,
job.
like me.
Yeah, like you, exactly. But like if you have a very clear scope and you know exactly what filters to define your search on, I think agency reviews is a great place to source your starting point of agencies. But for us, like we want to deliver a very human-driven search. And again, we're doing it for free because like our incentives are to help you and provide trust and accountability throughout the process. But like we are here in a consultative manner to help you figure out what the right search is. And we really want to lean into the human element of it. And that's a piece of our business that I don't think is going to change. We really, really want human connection when it comes to working with brands on finding a great agency, because I think like there is support needed when it comes to defining scope. And to your earlier point, like I think budget's a huge piece of that. I know you've had some experiences where budget is not clearly defined. And that creates a lot of problems in the agency search process. Like I would say more than anything outside of, figuring out the right channel and set of skills, like having the right budget in place is really, really important. Because one, that's what agencies are looking at when they're bidding on work. But two, like it helps you figure out what the right agency is for your business, because you never want to be the smallest client for an agency and you never want to be the biggest. I think that's an adage that like kind of gets nailed home a lot, but you want to find agencies where you are sort of in the sweet spot and they work with clients of that nature.
Yeah, that gives me an idea for another episode. I mean, I could make a list of like 20 questions every brand should ask an agency in their sales calls that I guarantee you no one has ever really asked. One of them being, what client pays you the least and what client pays you the most, and what are those numbers? That'll give you a good understanding of where the agency started, because oftentimes the company or the client that's paying them the least is their first client that's still on retainer. And like if that client is still on retainer 3 years in and they're still paying $500, even though the agency is charging $5,000, and that client is in your niche, that's a lot of green flags. Talking about what you were saying before, like that shows that they didn't try to jack up the price, right? Like their soft skills and their values are in line with someone that you'd want to work with. And then it also shows you that like they're having success with this brand for 3 years. They're not going to leave. So there's a whole bunch of questions there, but yeah, I think that rounds out the 5. I actually learned a lot in this too. Maybe we should do another 5. So if you're listening or watching and you like this, feel free to find me on Twitter or find Dan on Twitter. Let us know that you like this episode, and we'll keep going. We'll keep the list going longer. But Dan, thank you for coming on the show. Where can people find you and get in touch with you and Vendry?
Yeah, my pleasure. You can find me on LinkedIn under Dan Gray, or on Twitter under Growing Gray. But I really appreciate you having me. It's awesome to jam on this topic. I think one of the cool things is like on the surface, it might look like we compete with Vendry and agency reviews, but I think like the world of marketers and agency searches, I still think 99% of brands are still trying to do it themselves. And so the more resources like ours to support people and more podcasts and education around this topic that exists, I think is super important. So thank you for having me. I'm always glad to talk about these things. And you've been an awesome partner for Vendry as we've grown. And, we've sponsored your newsletter and I've seen a lot of success there. So thank you, for your partnership. And it's been great joining you today.
Thanks for coming on. Lovely to hear that we're always a good partner for brands. Not why we recorded this episode. I'm not paid to be here. Yeah. Or you're not paying to be here either. We were literally on a call and we were going through similar things. We're like, let's just record a pod and share this with people. But yeah, thanks so much, and tune in next time to the Marketing Max Show. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Marketing Max Show. It takes me and my team hours to produce it every single week, but it only takes you 15 seconds to hit that share button and text it to a friend, drop it in a Slack group, or share it on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or any of your favorite social platforms. I appreciate you taking the time to check out my content. Have an awesome day.